Deuteronomy 54, 1 through 12 is where we is. And we're still working on the discussion phase, and I'm going to have us harken back to a question that I think we poorly answered. We poorly orbited a short while ago. And our study is based on what happens in 34, 1 through 12, even if it doesn't feel like it. So I think some of you have read not only 34, but 31, 32, and 33, recognize that where we're leading to is to help us to get to some of the big and complex questions I believe that Christians who read certainly the first 5 books of the Bible should have about God, his fairness, his unfairness, etc. Okay, and I think sometimes Christians especially don't talk so much about that, and that's why sometimes we get into situations where we have Amanda, who's a 28-year-old Jesus believer, who's struggling that the Bible says we're humans, because of human nature that we borrow from Adam, says that we're basically failures without Jesus. And the culture right now is saying, no, and guys, I think if you're reading enough in the culture today, our culture is telling you this: humans are basically good people. Humans are basically good people, and we just make some mistakes sometimes. And that is creeping into, if it's not totally fleshed, into our churches. That's what's permeating our church bodies today. And partly it's happening because of something that Diane just wonderfully said. As much as we want to think about this book that we're using, believers and churches are not having their people use these. I went to a service last week, and they gave out the mislets. They gave out kind of the handout, and people spend more time looking at what's happening next, and nobody had their Bibles with them. So churches are pretty fine with putting a couple of things on the big screen and saying, this is what we're going to be talking about today, but no one's going home and doing any homework and then internalizing it, so they can't say, excuse me, because that's what I said to the pastor last week. I said, what you preached on was not what about those verses were.
You actually pushed back hard.
Yeah.
And how did it go?
We still seem to be cordial. So that's partly why you should do your work, so that you know what's up there. You're reading it kind of as the person's going through it, and you're creating your own questions and taking notes while someone is teaching you about it. So that's what I always appreciate about the lady sitting here on the left. So and I'm not finished ranting. Deuteronomy 34. In my NIV version, it says the death of Moses. And it reads, then Moses climbed Mount Nebo from the plains of Moab to the top of Pisgah, across from Jericho. There the Lord showed him the whole land, from Gilead to Dan, all of Naphtali, the territory of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the western sea, the Negev, and the whole region from the valley of Jericho, the city of palms, as far as Zoar. And then the Lord said to him, this is the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, when I said, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you will not cross over into it. And Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in Moab, as the Lord had said. He, being the Lord, buried him in Moab in the valley opposite Beth Peor. But to this day, no one knows where his grave is. Moses was 120 years old when he died, yet his eyes were not weak, nor his strength gone. The Israelites grieved for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days, until the time of weeping and mourning was over. Now Joshua, the son of Nun, was filled with the spirit of wisdom, because Moses had laid his hands on him. So the Israelites listened to him and did what the Lord had commanded Moses. Since then, no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, who did all these miraculous signs and wonders the Lord sent him to do in Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all officials and to his whole land. For no one has ever shown the mighty power or performed the awesome deeds that Moses did in the sight of all Israel. And so we're tracking right now with a study that's asking you, is it all worth it? Is it all worth it? And it's titled Looking Back, Looking Forward. And especially when I hear Diane say what she says about her daughter, saying, I'm done with church. Well, look, folks, as crazy as this study might be, she's asked herself the question, is it and was it all worth it? And her answer is, no. Right. And so part of my ranting today is to say this. Upstanding Christians, we struggle sometimes with some of these questions. We struggle with, why are we even being asked this? Because I know that the Lord taketh care of me. I know that the righteous and the prayers of the righteous availeth much. And so I do not worry, because I'm in the Lord's will and the Lord will take care of me. And I say that's rubbish. I'm not saying that's not rubbish that the Lord will not take care of you. I say it's rubbish that Christians don't worry about this stuff. I think Christians, more than they think, if we hearken back to the question that said, how does your faith and your relationship impact your lack of achievement or your feeling of failure? Well, it's one thing to say, I really never concern myself with that because as long as I'm in the Lord's will, I feel like I'm satisfied. I feel as though I'm right where the Lord would want me to be. That's almost a Moses position to have. But I'm not Moses, and I don't think none of us in here is. And during the course of this week, I'm sorry that Matt's not with us today because I want to use I want to focus a little bit on his brother without naming names. Now, we talked and we've been praying for, hopefully and continually, about his brother, who's having some very large struggles. And if any of you have met him, our meeting with him indicated he was a very huge man of God with a calling on his life. Yes or no?
Yes.
If you also remember the last time that he was introduced to us through his brother, we learned that he's struggling. Struggling so much to the point where one of the things, paraphrased, that he says is, I still believe in God, but different. And I will tell you that this guy who has a calling on his life, who's been, in many ways, a giant for the cause of Christ, has asked himself, was it and is it all worth it? And his answer is, I don't really know. You're darn right. Or he wants to be in a cave. Or he wants to run away from all this stuff.
But haven't we even heard within the last year, there's been articles about pastors that have left because they are questioning the whole thing.
Correct.
I mean, it's this whole thing again, but so people are human, and we are going to worry about stuff.
Yes, and believers, guys in the folks in this room, I appreciate our call to be holy. We're going to talk about that next step. I appreciate our call to be set apart. Appreciate that. But folks, we're going to relate better to real and regular life people when we recognize that this is a real person struggle. And pastors, just like Sarah said, pastors are leaving their calling because they're looking through past this pandemic stuff, thinking in some ways that their success is based on butts and bucks, and they're going, was it and is it all worth it? And they're going, when I look at things right now and I take a look at the land, it's not. I don't want to do this anymore. And I would say that if they had goals to be a millionaire, goals to be the next Elon Musk, goals to have all of the fame in the world, their calling was different once they got called into the ministry, and they changed, even if their achievement or success visions and dreams were no longer $1 million Elon Musk. It was, I have a full church, I have a church, and I have enough money that funds whatever it is that we do. And certainly post-pandemic, folks are looking at the state of what they believe churches to be, and they're going, why was I doing this 20, 30 years? Why was I doing this? And I would say that also, not only does it make them ask the question, was it and is it all worth it? I believe it affects their relationship with Jesus. I think they wind up then asking this question. And I did this when I watched Ellen and when Ellen and I raised our kids and I watched them go off into the world, I went, why me? I'm doing the work. I'm putting the stuff in. I'm forging the way you said I'm supposed to forge. I'm doing it what your scripture says, and this is the result. Why would I even do this if this is what the payoff is going to be? And folks, sometimes we're not honest about admitting that there are more times in our lives as even church people when that happens, when we go, why me? And what they're saying right now is enough to get us kicked out of churches, and so we don't say this. You're not supposed to have questions of doubt about who Jesus is and if you're in Jesus' plan. And does Jesus want what's best for you, or does Jesus want what's best for him? And sometimes that's not a question we talk about and we ever really discuss well, because what's best for him is best for you, but we may not be mature enough to see that. And that struggle is something that church people just don't talk about a whole lot, because when we get together on Wednesdays and Sundays, we talk about We talk about the things we're okay with you knowing. We talk about, and church people are really comfortable with this. Please don't misunderstand how I say this because it's going to sound like a rant, but put it in its proper place. We talk about our medications, our diagnosis, and the sick people in our life. But what we don't talk about is, I learned just recently that a very good friend, and he presented this to me to say, look, it's surprisingly how close we are to our families, and sometimes we don't know things, even with our families, because they don't want us to know that. So they show us a face that's a false one because they have a very big understanding that how things look is what's important to me. It's what I value. And so a very good friend said to me, I just learned that my nephew potentially needs a liver transplant, needs to be in dry out, and he's my nephew. And my thinking was, oh my gosh, if families aren't communicating that sort of stuff, and they're supposed to be like this, we folks that are working to play at being family, and we're supposed to be family, I'm not telling you that. If I tell you that my kid is needs a new liver because he's drunk himself out of an organ, it's going to make you, in my eyes, think worse of me. I don't want you to know that. And that's why we spend such an interesting time focusing on leaders in churches that fall. Because they spend time somehow continuing to make people think that they're better or they're perfect or they walk higher, as opposed to that there's a crisis of their faith almost daily. And when we take a look at the life of Moses, I would hope that some of you get passionate the way that you heard Sarah, because I love when Sarah gets here. And I love watching Sarah go at this with Steve and watching Steve smirk. And actually, it's kind of Sarah versus Steve and Daniel, and I love it.
Oh, within Nathan. It's all three of them.
Nathan's kind of the silent big guy.
No, he's in it too.
Okay.
It's usually 3 against 1.
It's delicious because that's where when we read these 12 verses, our passion should really come out about this, because I've always had a whole lot of questions about these 12 verses. And we're not going to know the answer to them until we get to eternity. But as human beings, we've got to be pondering, Moses has got to be ripped. Moses has got to be ripped. Now, we're not in the verses yet because we're still in the questions, but here's what I want to throw out for you. Moses runs essentially a church of 1 to 2 million people for 40 years. Mm-hmm. The one thing he's called to do that says success, it's not water from the rock. It's not manna. It's not the snake in the desert. The one thing that would show success is crossing over the Jordan. And at the finish line, the Lord says, sorry, you don't get to do that. Some choice conversation I'd like to think for the Lord. Right? And we'll get there as we get there. But that's why I hope your passions come up. And I will tell you this even before we get there. The Lord's big enough to handle you arguing with him about it. That's enough for you to handle them. He's big enough to handle it. So that means you need to go in at that, because if you're in a relationship, that's what you do. When you're in a relationship with a person, you're going, excuse me, got some questions here. And acting like everything's okay is not where we need to be, because the real world focuses and struggles with this stuff all the time. And we act like it's all perfect and we bought it and it's nicely in a bow and I'm perfectly satisfied with the life the way that Jesus gave it to me. And folks, we're going to be much more attracted to folks who, when they come to us with a variety of struggles, and look, somebody reminded me, the reason that we like to keep people at arm's length, even in our church relationships, is, and I appreciate Kathy regularly saying this, I appreciate Diane regularly saying family, right? Because the more you get used to that, the more you get used to sometimes you don't like people, but you're still family. It gets real easy to keep you at arm's length because your stuff is messy. When you get involved in your stuff, the more it's messy. I'll tell you, one of the fun things I love about Gina is Gina and I get together when we're not doing this, and sometimes have conversations about the messiness that makes up our lives. And the fact that we have the brothership that we have, it can go to crazy places sometimes, and it's perfectly fine, because I know Gene loves me and vice versa. And so we get to talk about really the quirks and the craziness of our lives that sometimes Christians, church people, don't talk about. And it really feels better sometimes to not just be unburdened to the Lord, to go, Gene, here's my stuff, man. And here's what happens. When he goes away, he knows how to pray for me. He knows what to be thinking about, because you know what? You know how we say when celebrity people die, we say, well, make sure you think about them and keep them in your thoughts and in your prayers. Why? If you're not a believer, your prayers avail nothing. So why keep people that are dead or their families in your thoughts? I don't know about that, because they're in your thoughts. Pointless. And I had a discussion with a friend to say, how much time do we spend? And this is why we haven't seen Diane. Diane and Chris met today for the first time. Chris, I'm really looking forward to that. And Diane has been where she's been because she's been potentially looking to invest in her sister's life. And that means sort of maintaining a distance that allows COVID not even to go into a structure where, you know, if you know your household is kind of COVID free, you know exactly what it is that you're exposed to. If you're hanging out with other people, you don't know that, you know, Nate has more cooties than the law allows, and cooties is worse than COVID.
Totally true.
But it's to say that there should be a closeness about us that allows us to enter each other's lives, as messy as they are, and to do it while we're alive. Because when you show up at my memorial ceremony, oh no.
You don't care.
If you bought $100 worth of flowers to put on the altar,
You-
I don't care. And try, if you can, to see me while I'm viable. Because while I'm ill, I may not have a whole lot of appreciation for you while I'm ill.
Yeah. Her mom just told me that her mother was in hospital. She said, I want to have my memorial before I pass. So she had people for almost a whole day. She had people coming and going and talking to her. She talked to every single one of them, and some of them she had saved certain things to give to them, and she wanted to do all that before she died. So I don't want this going on after I'm gone. After, you know. So
Yeah.
it was just people talk about doing that, and a lot of times it's by the time you know they're gonna pass away, they're not
Right.
cognizant enough, unfortunately.
Right.
But I was just getting goosebumps. I read this. She had this wonderful afternoon with all these people that she loved that hadn't seen for a long time.
Right.
So, which they all have come from out of the woodwork, you know, the next time when she passed, but they wouldn't have seen her. That was kind of a cool idea.
It is cool. And we don't do that because it almost feels like we're saying a premature goodbye to somebody. But here's the thing. You all coming to support Ellen after I'm dead is nice, except I ain't there. I can't go, hey, I'm there in spirit. No, I'm not. Hopefully what's happening is I'm in the presence of the Lord and I'm partying like a rock star, not worried about you guys looking at my cremated body. No, I'm not thinking about that. So as crazy as it is, we need to be involved in each other's messiness and in our lives right now. And it gets easier to get people through the crazy when you know you can partner with other folks and they recognize that we're all no doggone good except for Jesus. It just gets easier. And your stink is a different stink than my stink. Or maybe my stink hasn't been exposed as much yet. Yeah, and you see, this is why I'm missing Amanda right now, because especially as a teacher and etc., she's the person with the mindset for tomorrow's youth that we want, helping to be instrumental. And if she's looking back and saying this is all worth it, what she's going to be teaching her kids in the next generation is that's an institution that's defunct. It's past its time. It no longer serves a purpose. It's out of step. That is so saddening. Let me pause there. Daniel-san, Hawaii person.
That's you, Bruce.
Oh, he's not unmuting. Oh, there he is.
I am. Sarah, can you mute yourself so I don't?
Yep, I'm muting us now.
Preston, I appreciate what you're saying there. You know, just two quick thoughts. One, I think about the Apostle Paul because he went through so much junk and yet he still had his faith, right? And I mean, I think it's certainly the gold standard of those who follow Christ to kind of look at that. You know, a guy who admittedly was messing up in his own life, as he explained, but then also talking about, you know, the shipwrecks and the beatings and all this other stuff, and yet he still had faith. But I was reminded, and she's gone on to be with the Lord, so I guess I can share this. I was reminded of Annie Bishop when she was still alive. Some of you know her. She was a longtime member at our church, and you may remember, if you knew her, that she struggled physically for a long, long time. And you would call her up or go see her and say, Annie, how are you doing today? And she'd just say, suffering is where she got to. And I remember not too long before she passed, I went to see her and she said, you know, I struggle sometimes with, am I really saved? Because if I were, I don't know if the Lord would let me suffer this much. And I thought, wow, you know, she had reached that point where she was really having her questions about that. And I thought, wow, if she can have those questions, then I think any of us can. So just speaking to where you are, Preston, and I hope she had a piece about that. I know she was. I know she was a Christian. I knew it. But just to your point, yeah, everybody has their breaking point.
I appreciate that, Bruce. You know, especially when you talk about sort of giants of the faith, or folks that it's easy to follow them as they follow the Lord. Billy Graham was one of those. And if you folks have any familiar with Billy Graham, from all the gigantic movement that he was a part of, he had Parkinson's that got pretty awful. And Parkinson's is not an ideal way to pass because you're watching your body fail you as your mind is typically in the body where the body's failing you. So it's almost the opposite of Alzheimer's, where your body sometimes is in perfect shape and your mind's not. With Parkinson's, your mind's in really good shape and you recognize that your body's failing you, that there's deterioration that's happened. And for a person that had made the strides, that had done kingdom business for 70, 8 decades, I can see them having a crisis of faith. But again, I'm not telling you that they did. I'm telling you, in my humanness, I can understand that. I can understand that. Partly because the Lord doesn't show up with me and say, let me walk you into eternity. If he did, I'm sure a whole lot of us would be signing up for that bus line, because that's the way to go. In addition to jeans, make sure I have some ice cream and some other stuff. But this lends itself back to the question that says, how does your faith, your relationship with Jesus impact your lack of achievement and failure? I think when you're looking back at your life and you're starting to see that you didn't achieve the goals that you thought you were supposed to be heading toward, you begin to then say, number one, am I a believer? Number two, does he really care about me? And number three, why me? Why are you singling me out for what it is I'm experiencing right now? So let me pause. Any feedback to that?
I've actually two comments I'd like to make. Number one, going back
Oh,
to
you have to speak up. I know. Project.
that. Regarding your comments regarding your kids, you relish confrontation. They are your kids. That's all I think we need to say about that. One of the questions that's not in our stack here that I think we probably should have started with is a definition. The question is, what is the definition of fair?
So we don't start with that because we're going to end with that.
Fair enough.
But I appreciate that that you're very honest about that. And part of the reason we're going to have that discussion is when it becomes more impassioned, when we start talking about Moses, one of the questions that should come out of that is God fair? And hopefully it's on the list. I think it.
Is part of the discussion.
So a couple weeks ago, I saw a conversation. Some of you may know who Jordan Peterson is. He's I don't believe he's a Christian, but I think the Holy Spirit's working on him because you can see some of his recent videos. He's sort of said, I believe the crucifixion and the resurrection are real. And he said the most moral teaching you can ever find is Jesus on the Mount of Olives. So I think he's being drawn by a lot of the suffering that his wife had gone through and some of his own personal health issues. But he was having a conversation with a priest, and the conversation they were having was kind of like, why are young people leaving the church? And in his conversation, Peterson suggested that the issue happens to be with generations within the church being told that once you are saved, all your problems are gone. And from an eternal perspective, I suppose you could argue that. But he says that's part of the issue. And so now you have a generation of these people who think, okay, I'm saved, so I'm not going to have any problems. And then they run into their first problems and they think, wait a minute, am I really saved? Or second, is this thing really real? And he's like, instead of doing that, you need to get your young people and you need to sit down and say, you are about to face the biggest challenge in your life. He's like, first off, this gives them purpose. He's like, the reason you're seeing a lot of these groups out there, the Antifa and all those things, is because they're looking for a purpose. And they think that they've picked up this just cause that they're fighting for. It's like, it's just because there's a lack of purpose. He said, but if you sit them down and say, okay, you accept Jesus as your Savior, your life purpose is to go through this process of sanctification. And that as you're being sanctified, you're going to suffer. You're going to go through challenges in your life. But you need to expect it.
Right.
It's like if you sit them down and you prepare them that that's what's going to happen. He's like, we have to remind them. Jesus said, pick up your cross and follow me. It's not like it's going to be roses and flowers and unicorns flying around. It's going to be hard. It's like, but if you give them that expectation to start with, that when they go through those struggles and you go through those trials, they're not going, why is this happening? You have to understand, you're being sanctified. You're going through these challenges because God is trying to make you more like Him. And it's like, if you start with that, it's like, but we don't do that. Generations, though, now that you're saved, everything's going to be come out of roses. And I think he has a great point.
I think it also, we talked about the fact that folks are not reading the Bible. If you read the Bible, is there one person that follows God and has zero trouble? Name one. Joseph did everything right. Yeah, he had a big mouth and he talked too much, but he ends up in prison trying to do the right thing. And eventually God uses all of that and it comes down the line. If you go to the Bible, there's a precedence not for everything being roses and unicorns, but for everything being difficult as we go through that progress. And I think that's important to know.
I think in our humanness, especially based on what it is that Steve just presented, you're gonna take stock of where you are from time to time and say, is what I'm doing worth the payout? And look, I think because we struggle with what the payout is, we struggle with what Steve's big word is, sanctification. We go, is what I'm doing and what I'm going through worth it?
Well, and the question is, when's the payout?
Correct. Because it feels like the payoff in order to get there is the thing we don't want to do. Die. Right? And we're so afraid of dying. By the way, the other points to the adversary who's made us so fearful of death, right? That we can't be excited that that's a temporary measure. And because Jesus is the only person that came back, and he didn't get into great details about how did you get there, what happens, how many angels meet us, is there a light, how much time do we... He didn't give us all that detail. He just went, I'm going to hang out with you for about 50 days and then I'm going back. But we have a whole lot of questions. So we don't like having misinformation, not misinformation, minimal information. And that's where our faith has to kick in.
We also like to live in this world. So we keep forgetting that this world is a short time in the grand scheme of things, whereas what's coming next is the real reward.
Give, drink and hold this and touch it
Exactly.
and drink it.
And you know, with this stuff with my sister and what's going on with my niece, and I'm trying to help her as well. It's like, you know, you can only listen and help and extend, you know, whatever comfort you can. But at the end of the day, and this kind of helped me with Amanda when she got inside of me yesterday, they're in God's hands.
Right.
I'm in God's hands,
Right.
and I can only do and be responsible for what I do, say.
Right.
And I think we get caught up in that. And then it's just overwhelming sometimes if you're like taking on the cares of everybody and you can't.
Yes. And that's why, look, Hillary Clinton is wrong and right about this because hers is not in context of the Lord. That's why the Lord created his church. Because it takes all of us. It takes the myriad experiences that Diane has, added to the experiences that Jean has, blended up and chopped up in the mixer with what Chris has. Because then what happens is we don't find topics and situations surprising to us if we put ourselves out there to recognize that that's how we have to support each other. Because folks, as a parent, it gets really hard when you realize that you don't have the influence and you don't have the power to exert to make a thing happen any longer. And it takes some time to be able to say, and that's why I'm using this and me, and Diane brought it up, is it all worth it? Was it worth it having kids? Was it worth it to go through the recipe that the Lord says I'm supposed to go through? And this is the result. And it takes time to get to the point, because it's taken time to go, Lord, you gave me these. In essence, you gave them to me, right? And this is smarty pants guy, and this is doing what Gene says, confrontation. After I get through arguing with the Lord, I'm like, wait, you lent them to me. I followed your recipe partially successfully to get there. Guess what? They're yours. They're yours. It takes some time to get there, and the sanctification process helps with that. But along the way, there's a whole lot of gut punches that go, this is the worst. It's the worst day. And when Gene says, your kids, you like confrontation, they're your kids. And my kids, I've got a kid that will regularly tell his mom stuff just to get her going. I don't believe nothing you say makes any sense, and your generation is silly. Why does he say that? He may not believe it all. He likes to get a rise out of his mom. And it takes some time to back off that and go, okay, I didn't kill him. Yet. Point for the Lord. Now we're following this back over. Because sometimes you don't have the energy to do it. You're just, when it's new and fresh and you're not prepared through the sanctification process, you go, what's the point? What's the point of this Christian junk? What's the point of reading this Bible? What's the point in all the junk we do if the payoff doesn't look like it makes any sense? Plus, I don't really know what the payout is. Jesus didn't give me details.
Well, again, the two things. Number one, the last chapter of their lives has not been written. So things could change because, number two, I think of a Franklin grain. I think of you may not know the name, Alex Crane, who, wow, and the Lord brought him back strong. You know, so there may be a season, but when they come back, they're going to come back stronger. I think the same thing could be true with Amanda. That when they finally get whatever it is that it's going to take for God to get their attention, when they come back, because I mean we have a promise: train up a child in the way he should go, and when they're old, they will not depart from it. That it doesn't mean when they're young; it means when they're old. Because every seed that has been sown will grow. His word will not return empty. So you have to rely upon those sorts of things and continue to do the best you can to encourage them and strengthen them. That's not to say that my grown kids have done great. Matter of fact, my son's probably doing better than his sister is. But train up a child, do the best you can, and when the final chapter does get written, you might find a thing to do.
It can be at the last second.
I'm done.
Yes, and that is where the is it all, was it all worth it comes into play. Because here's the key. It's not that Gene is incorrect, and I hope you didn't see any me mimicking or making funny faces while Gene was saying whatever he said. Because I really do very much believe in the ideal. Watching it play itself out leads itself to people telling you things like this. They'll come around. I'm a guy who's a believer, and I've had more parents tell me they'll come around. Here's my problem, because it lends the problem I have lies in the truth Diane just said. It may happen at the last breath of their life. And here's the thing. Gene is right with this when he says, and when they're old, they will not depart. Guess what? When they're old, I may not be here to see it. And that frustration is the one that, through the life I have, that permeates it, makes me say, is it all and was it all worth it?
It's not fair.
That is correct. That's correct. And believers, Christian, church people, you've got to be honest about dealing with that question. Because there are several times in our life when we look at situations and we go, is it worth it? Is it fair?
So, since we're talking about your kids, you opened up this can of worms, by the way. How did you fare at their age, spiritually speaking?
You don't know.
No, I'm not saying.
I smoked away from my faith for a period of years, maybe 12. Totally walked away, but definitely had that span of time where I'm like, I'm gonna do what I want.
Okay.
Because I love it.
I'm loving what I am. But my faith in Jesus was never wavering. If it was wavering, it's when I went to school and then met people from all over the world, and we had faith conversations all night, or religion conversations all night. I live where Diane lived, which is, I ain't got to go to church. Mom and Dad ain't telling me what time to be home. And college got a whole lot of girls said it. Lord, but if you've been born again, perhaps you might have said it. And so there was certainly a batch of years where I wasn't living for Jesus. But one of the interesting things is I'm an old-fashioned letter writer and receiver. So I've got letters from folks in college who say things like, your faith in Jesus, blah, 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 blah. And so I go, okay, my faith was there, but was I living like a rock star? Hard. I was trying hard to.
But it was percolating around. And I feel like, taking Gene's point, we've put this into our kids.
Yep.
It's in there. It may be hidden a little bit, but it's in there and it's percolating. So ain't over till God says it's over.
Yeah, but when he says it's over, I may not be around. Here's another way.
Not your problem. At the end of the day, it's an individual choice. Which is hard to get there when you like.
Yes.
Perhaps you have a different attitude toward Hebrews 12:1.
Okay. So what? Surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses?
You may not be around physically, but you may be witnessing.
Yeah, but here's the thing. I don't think the witnesses that are, we talked about this, are sitting around watching us having church. I think witnesses is that they've gone on and their testimony lingers. Not that they're going, we're going to pray Preston into heaven. Preston is he getting into heaven today? He's a believer. Yep. Looking at us, hanging out with Jesus, going, this is a time of our lives. But
Like I said, different attitude toward that particular passage.
I hear you. Folks, I think that the words that Steve referenced and that Diane talked about, sanctification is a process. See, because you're immediately sanctified. We're going to talk about this in our next study. Sanctification is an immediate process, but then it's also an ongoing process.
Positional versus progressive.
Correct. And that means that when we talk about do not be conformed to this world, right? But have a renewal of your mind and be transformed and conformed to the likeness of Jesus. Well, for some people that can happen instantaneously, but for most of us, it's a lifelong process. And we talked about this in past studies. The Lord is able to be patient with us and watch our junk because he's eternal. He's not on a timeline.
That's right.
So we want the Lord to show up when we need him to, because I only got maybe 70 years here. And now that COVID's here, I only have 35.
And that's what's fair. That's what our definition of fair is. my timeline, my schedule, my desires. It's all about me. That's what fair is for a lot of us.
In fact, for those of us who aren't believers, that's exactly how we define fair. And for a lot of us that are believers, we still buy into that definition of fair.
Doing the right things. Why is this happening to me? I'm a good person.
Yes.
Why must I be sick?
Yes. Why me? Why is this happening to me? So let me back off. College man, Hawaii person. So let me ask you this question based on us exploring that. If your faith impacted, because your achievements don't seem to be where they need to be, is your faith in Jesus impacted? The goals, the dreams of your life. What people in your life know what those goals and dreams are? Who knows?
Sometimes none of
Mhm.
them. Sometimes nobody.
Why not?
Great. Well, so you're afraid to share with because
Oh,
squash you, laugh at you, think it's silly.
yeah.
You're ridiculous. On and on and on and on.
Well, the fact that also if you fail, then somebody
It's
knows
true, but
that you didn't.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Well, we don't necessarily like accountability. Because accountability means you get to ask me intrusive questions that may shed light on the messiness of my life, the messiness of my activities, the messiness of what my life has led to, and I don't necessarily want you knowing that. So when you ask me something, here's what you need to ask me. How you doing? You don't really mean that. What you mean to say is hello, and you want me to shut up after that. Because how you doing, I need to tell you how I'm doing. I'm struggling. This whole Christian thing has got me bogged down. Watching the state of the country right now not operate in a way that says they should be God-centered and Jesus-centered. And if you want to be social activists, Jesus gives the best recipe for social activism. I was going to start today taking a look at college surveys that my wife had shown me about the top 4 or 5 things that college Christians thought were important. By the way, on that list is climate change. Climate change is on that list for Christians who are young Christians in college. Climate change. But also on that,
ones out west.
I appreciate that, Michaela. But where's the question?
How?
Because it's an activity that they believe that they can work and invest in to eventually change. Do they know that it's going to be insurmountable? Yes. That's why you had Greta Thunberg coming and telling us as a 13-year-old, because she's on the climate change bus for the rest of her life.
But it also goes in line with what Steve had said, that because it was climate change and social injustice. Those were the 2 top,
Gives them
which goes to what Steve said, that, their priorities are the world priorities because we're not teaching them as Christians, what priorities.
well, it gives them that purpose, right?
Correct.
It gives them that, and it gives them that purpose that they can feel like they are doing something. But we have to be able to help them understand what the right purpose is.
Yeah.
And that's hard.
It is. That's also in part, we don't necessarily share our dreams and our visions and our goals, especially with our kids. Because our kids need to see us in many ways as successes. They need to see us as giants, as heroes. So we don't necessarily share our goals and stuff with our kids because when we miss the mark, the person we least want to point at us and say what a failure is
Our kids.
right? So that's probably why we don't sit down and read the Bible coincidentally with our child or side by side, because we struggle with what it is, and we struggle with the fact that we need help with it. And so since we don't want to reach out for help to show that that's an opportunity area for us as adults, well, then we never sit down with our kids and help them to know that's a goal, not only of my life, but it should be a goal of your life too. Then we just blow them, because then you never need to ask me, I never see you read the Bible, but except when we get together on Wednesdays. Well, if I don't have it, then you don't need to hold me accountable for it. Never failure, never shortcoming. But I like what Terry said. Most people, maybe your spouse, and when I say significant other, folks, I'm not taking into account the gender dysphoria today. What I mean by that is if you're if you have a fiance and you're hard dating a boyfriend or girlfriend, getting to know them, your significant other, maybe that. Well, there's a list of stuff there. Okay, so it says they did some work.
Well, you sent it to me.
Yeah, I guess I forgot somewhere. Okay, so my best. Sometimes your best friend knows and your spouse doesn't. Right? My spouse, my significant other, my parents, maybe, but sometimes your parents telling you that you're a failure is almost weirder than your kids telling you. You're never going to amount to anything anyway. And whatever these goals were stupid to start off with. My family, my colleagues, sometimes, if you're kind of striving together to build something together, then sometimes you let them in. But especially if it branches off from the work that you do together, I'm not telling you because I want to start my own enterprise. The student body. I tend to think that young people are better about this when they start off than older people are. Because young people don't really know what they're going to do, so they're okay with throwing a whole bunch of stuff on the wall, seeing what sticks. And if it doesn't land there, well, we've got reunion in 15 to 20 years. I can tell you what I have accomplished in that time. Almost everyone, I don't know if that's really true. I don't know if we're as transparent to tell everyone. But no one at all, I think that really resonates. And that also lends itself to just me. I'm the only person who really knows what I wanted my life to be about. Because I don't want other people to be disappointed when I miss the marks. And so sometimes we're in our own private Hades, dealing with your own junk, because it's so messy, you don't feel it's okay to share it with us. In part, because you like your life to look pristine in a certain way when it gets presented to them. How you doing, sister? Well, I'm struggling with a little bit of rheumatism, but other than that, taking a couple vitamin D pills, I'm moving right along. Oh, make sure you pray for my cousin Larry, who's got diverticulitis. That's church people talk.
How many times you've been burned by gossip talk? And that story gets changed a few times before it ends with the pastor coming to you and saying, "What are you doing?" I mean, that happens all the time. So they wonder why people don't open up. It's because we're so judgmental. And my sister, she was telling me problems at work, and she's like, "I don't need you to solve it. I just need you to listen." And how many times do we just need to say that? Just hear me. I think people want to be heard, but they don't really need a lot of feedback, and they don't need to talk at that.
Okay.
That's hard to do.
Other than my wife, who I'm still learning this from, I would think that, because guys, you know us. We do want to solve it, so I want all your ideas. But if you're a lady and you're talking to me, please preface it by saying, I do not want you to solve the problem. I just want you to listen. Because other than that, if you're telling me a problem, you speak to, he's an engineer. He's a problem solver during the course of an insurance thing. He's a PC. When you tell me your problem, you're saying, fix it.
Well, we all want to do that. But how many times have someone told us, "I'm dealing with this," but we have to almost one-up them with something that happened in our life?
Of course.
And that might not be what they need.
Correct. That's why you got to be careful with saying, I know what you're going through. Because don't. Because you don't. So, I certainly will admit that one of my strong gifts is not necessarily empathy. But I can sympathize. I can sympathize because I understand the situation. Because part of the reason I can't empathize is I'm not you. And how your experiences is affecting you is not going to experience. My wife earlier today said something to me flatteringly, and she said, "You're a Borg." No,
Flattering, okay.
that's one of the nicer ways. If you understand Star Trek references, hopefully what that means is the positive thing about that is resistance is futile. You can be assimilated. And I'm not sure because that's kind of what I'm about. I'm trying to help assimilate you in the Christian. So that's the good part. The other bad part is Borgs are the most rogue. They don't care. Borgs do not care about you.
B-O-R-G. Borg.
No, that's Borg. A Borg would be way worse. Not a Borg. Do not comment on the facilitator during the morning, Chris. Bored, not bored. I am going to hit from this right now. But having said that, be careful. And this is kind of what Diane was saying. Be careful saying, I know what you're going through. And when you give examples, you probably need to preface it saying, I haven't gone through something that's yours, but here's something like that. So I can sympathize in some regard, but you can't empathize because you're not going through it. And people want to say right away, I know what you're going through. You don't.
It can be the same thing, it's just still not the same thing.
Because you're not me. Right.
My usual response is I cannot imagine.
And that's probably more
That's what I
honest.
say.
It's more honest. But you know what? And Diane said this thing that Christians want to say quickly. Let's get this right. Folks, look, we judge all the time. We judge all the time. But we want to be churchified with it and say, I don't want to be judgmental. Because that's built into what you are. But here's the thing. When you're having encounters with people, say this to them. I can't judge the state of your relationship with Jesus. But guess what? I'm a behavior judger. And here's the cool thing. Especially this happens in discussions with Gene and me. With family, you can tell them anything. Because when you hear the first thing, it's going to be shocking. And then at the end of the day, you go, well, still love them. But that's as weird as all get out. And you need to have kind of a relationship where you can say, that is pretty weird. Because when you can honestly say that it's pretty weird, it gets easier to come back and tell them something else weird the next time. But if you act like, well, the Lord may not be okay with that behavior, but I'm certainly fine with it. Anyway, somebody is weird because you can judge.
You know, Diane's comment is kind of rumbling in my brain here. When someone tells us that something is going on in their lives, we have a tendency to do the one-upmanship kind of thing. And I think and maybe this is the optimism in me, I think there's an honest motivation to that when we can we hope that it'll make them feel better that they're not going through this one-up thing that we're talking about. And so when the old saying is, I felt bad about not having any shoes when I saw somebody with no feet.
Correct.
You know, so when we feel better about our situation, we find out that somebody else is going through something worse. That's, I think, the motivation, but it doesn't necessarily resonate on the other side of that in that way.
You're correct. And that's why Diane's right when she says sometimes people just want you to listen.
That's right.
And believers, that's why you got 2 ears
Why not?
and 1 mouth. So you can keep it, and that was mouth, really. I just mispronounced it. The listeners in Cleveland.
Thank you, Lacus.
How do you feel? How do you feel about others observing your lack of achievement, your failure to succeed at your vision and your dream? How do you feel?
If it's just me knowing they don't.
Sure.
They don't know that I've not accomplished blah, 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 whatever it might be.
You sure?
Sometimes the people make an assumption, right? That if you like, they think that you should be doing something different, or that you should have done something by now in your life, whatever the case may be. We make assumptions, and we can sometimes think that you're a failure. I hate using that word, but you think that. And so if you think that about somebody else, what are they thinking about you? So, you don't necessarily like people to think that you are a slacker, not doing something. So maybe that's why we should share, because the goals that we have aren't necessarily the goals that they may think you should have.
Correct.
I don't know if that makes any sense.
Brilliant.
Can I be responsible for what their expectations are?
No, but the thing is, you may have those same expectations, not necessarily knowing that you do. People don't always know that they have that expectation about somebody, because you just don't even think about it. You make an assumption just because of who you are, what you've done, what you've, I mean, we all make assumptions about people. And if you say you don't make an assumption about somebody, I might have to question that because I think we all make assumptions, right? First impressions, yeah, make an assumption, right? It's true. It's very true. But I mean, you can't be accountable for what they think of you, but you almost have to think, what is somebody thinking? And do I need to maybe have a conversation with them to just let them in? And again, it goes back to where Terry was going, where, "Ugh," or where you going with the, "Ugh," see the messiness of everything. Uh, you get into a catch-22 sometimes. Sometimes. Just,
Sometimes you think other,
yes.
Correct too.
because you don't express what you're feeling to somebody.
Mhm.
You don't get that positive feedback, and we're not good at doing positive feedback without anybody saying anything.
Yes. Well, this is it. Well, right, your goal is here, right? Which may or may not be attainable, depending on what it is. But Diane may see that, well, you have achieved this. And you may not be here, but that's okay because you still have made an accomplishment. You've still done something. And but we have to be willing to share that. And we don't tend to just give compliments. We tend to highlight the negatives.
And we don't take
And we don't take compliments well. Yes. Oh, no. We don't know how to take a compliment because you're like,
we don't want to be proud,
right,
puffed up.
right. And so I said, trying to be a compliment, you're like,
Doing it for reasons not of yourself,
mhm.
and you're like, I'm going to take a big way. God, it's it's difficult. Focus on
I think the more we discuss it, the more we figure out kind of where those interesting lines may be. We can practice
Appreciate the compliment.
it. And we
You both are really good about taking comments.
yeah, no.
Here.
Remember, we started talking about giving people their flowers while they're alive.
Yeah, I guess so.
This is what we're talking about is being transparent to the point where you do have knowledge of those things. Because folks, look, we do this all the time, just the way that Sarah described. This happens more so. Let me give you 2 examples. One in the church is when people suddenly retire and you have no reason why. You don't know why, but it looks like there's failure someplace, and you're in your head spinning your wheels, going, "What's the reason? What's the reason? What else? What was going on?"
I'm confused
Yes, sir.
because maybe it's a mindset, but retirement to me sounds like a success.
Early retirement, now. It should be, but
And I'm not talking about retirement when you necessarily kind of choose. It's retirement that comes out of the blue all of a sudden and doesn't have I'm taking care of somebody or I'm changing my priorities. It's I'm leaving.
Okay.
So good question there. This happens to you at work sometimes when supervisors or managers suddenly are repositioned or seek employment elsewhere. And your question in some ways is what happened? The flip side of this is also, like Sarah said, is folks, we see an Elon Musk and we see a Jeff Bezos, and as weird as they may look, we go, that person's absolutely successful. Now, we also see people who hurt themselves, sometimes even have suicidal ideation because what we think of success is not success for that person. That person has failed in some regard, and we don't know what that is. Because when we look into their lives from externally and from a superficial standpoint, we think that's success. That's achievement. And I think that part of the reason that if they have suicidal ideation, because they don't share, they don't let people in so that people can help them along the way when they're missing the mark. Yeah. Yeah. I'm not a big Hollywood kind. I mean, I know about pop culture, but Robin Williams is a guy who I loved his brilliance. So his death because of the Lewy body syndrome had been diagnosed, and then he also had Parkinson's, and he felt the impact of all that. He just felt it was the smarter thing to take his own life. He had depression. He had Lewy body syndrome, so his body was failing him, like Parkinson's, but worse so because Lewy body syndrome is particularly even more devastating. Um, and his kids knew some of the depression, but didn't know the extent. And so, look, especially when we're talking about being believers, you guys, you got to let people in when stuff kind of gets crappy.
Well, this is an overgeneralization. That's the disclaimer. Robin Williams's situation is often the case when you get a chance to look behind the clown's face.
Yeah.
I mean, I think of Carol Burnett, who's, now up in years. But again, a great clown, but what a life, what a background, what tragedy has led to that. A lot of the times the folks that make us laugh the most are the ones that have had the least to laugh at in their past. And so it's oftentimes a compensation for what they've been through.
But I'd rather they make me laugh than they tell me the story of their messiness.
Absolutely.
And so they don't share their messiness. They share their skill at making me laugh because that's easier for them.
Mhm.
And guys, we've got to be about something better and something more in depth if we really believe in that sanctification process that Steve just talked about, which we will talk more about with our.
Sounds like to me, we should treat everyone as walking wounded.
Mhm.
Words matter. Like you said, we have fear. And, we don't know what people are facing or what they've been through or where they're at that moment. I think that's what I see is the most defeating thing right now across all. Like I even had a daughter who took herself off some social media. She said, "I'm spending too much time on this. And it's wasteful time. It's not even things that are productive." And I'm like, well, yes, there's some maturity finally.
Yeah.
But I mean, we don't know.
No, and because of our society right now, we're not finding solace or comfort in people that are next door. We're finding solace and comfort in people we're never going to meet
Mhm.
that we call friends because they like our posting.
TikTok.
Score one for the adversary.
Reading a story about a young woman who's a farmer and she was posting her daily life. Well, it sounds like she took her life. She's 19 years old.
Mhm.
And it's like, if you didn't, TikTok people didn't see that.
Right.
They only saw the happy side of her.
The influencer who's telling
Yeah.
people the good parts about her life.
Farmers notoriously are depressed.
Of course, because in many ways they're isolated and unappreciated.
Yeah, and they're struggling.
Correct.
They've got a legacy, generations of family, and they can't make the farm work.
Correct. America is paying them not to farm. That's where we is. And so, yes. And so some of those family historical lineages, some of that legacy is out the window because farmers, we're not in a agrarian society anymore. We don't appreciate farmers.
Mhm.
Doesn't we can make our own meat. We can invent our own meat. We don't need farmers. So we can clone stuff. So there's stuff that goes in there. How do you feel? Yeah, so it feels okay enough when we all seem to be struggling together at the same time. But after others experience success and realize their goals, it doesn't feel so good.
Mhm.
Or when I paid my dues, it doesn't feel good at all. That's the one I think that resonates with us older adults. If I put my time in doing the grunt work, if I've done the heavy lifting, if I've been the front line guy, it's time for me to get my just desserts. That's fair.
Mhm.
All right, here's a question we're not supposed to ask with church people. So let's see if you got an answer for this one. Have Yahweh ever seemed to deny your personal achievement? Has Yahweh God ever seemed to deny your personal achievement or your dream?
I don't know what you mean by that. When you say deny,
Yeah.
is that no, you haven't made it yet, or no, you're not going to get this desire?
Both.
Oh.
If you watch, which I do, Joel Osteen regularly, There's a whole lot of people who have, stop crying over there, Caleb. A whole lot of folks who have, I believe, Santa lists of stuff that they think are their goals and their achievements. I can comfortably tell you, a lot of them ain't getting it. And I will tell you, I believe strongly from the teaching that seems to be a part of the self-help, the session that they have together. Some of those people are going to blame God when they don't get what it is that's on their Santa list.
And yet they start out so well. This is my Bible. I am what it says I am. If you is what it says you is, be what you're supposed to be. And acknowledge that. There's just so much good in his opening, and then it just careens downhill. But yeah, it is a self-help session. But yeah, it's like, is God, if God says no, okay, church answer, Sunday school answer, he's wiser. And he knows the end from the beginning. He probably has a purpose.
Okay. Eve didn't agree with that.
How do you figure that?
Anybody want to help?
It's a debate.
No. I'm saying she didn't disagree with the judgment that came when she disobeyed.
Oh, I don't mean she agreed with judgment. She agreed, she in many ways believed that God was stifling her personal achievement.
There are a lot of churches that are teaching that now too.
I said that, Steve, not Steve Jenkins said that.
No, there are.
You're right. Okay.
There are pastors that are teaching. There's that one guy that I forgot his name now, but he's literally leading a church and he's teaching people that God intentionally denied them the tree of the knowledge of good and evil because he's attempting to deny them knowledge, and he's still doing so today.
Right. If you get bogged down in that whole original sin, tree of knowledge of good and evil, here's probably a really good allegory that I heard to help deal with this, if you can understand it. Let me see. Yes, parent, yes, parent, yes, parent, yes, parent, yes, parent, yes. Okay. So all of you parents in this room have kids and you've taught them how to drive.
Right? Yeah,
Okay.
on.
So when you get in the car and you have 4 to 8 cylinders, and you teach them how to drive, very first thing you teach that kid is where what is.
Right.
Why not the gas?
They don't need to be told that.
So, the Garden of Eden in some ways is like the Lord saying, all of this is yours. There's the break, though. Stop. Okay. Look, this happens in Deuteronomy 34, 1 through 12. I would bet you Moses' dream, Moses' achievement, Moses' sense of, I have done what the Lord called me to do, is stepping over the Jordan and going, we're here. And I would almost suggest to you strongly that Moses would go, okay, it's okay for me to die now. That's not what happens.
Take fire.
Listen to you. Absolutely. I will also say that there's at least another guy. Here, let me give you an example. And we won't do this one. We'll take a look at an example in our next study. Thorn in the flesh. Who's that guy? I hear you.
Paul.
What's he at? What's the whole thorn in the flesh thing?
No.
He says, Lord, I've got either a person who's a pain in my butt or I've got a literal something that is ailing me. Can you
Fix it.
disappear?
Fix it.
And the Lord goes,
Nope. Well, no, actually he says, I can, but I'm not.
He says, I can, but I'm not. Because in your weakness, I'm strong. I would suggest that personal achievement would be for, and people postulate what the thorn in the flesh is, whether it's people or whether it's epilepsy or baldness or other stuff, blindness. But Paul doesn't get that. Paul also says, Lord, the things that I do, I don't want to do. Can you take that away? Lord goes,
Nope. You got it.
thank the Lord. Well, what's it say? What's on the list there? Oh, there's some things, huh? Okay. Has the Lord ever seemed to deny your personal achievement dreams? He doesn't answer my prayers. Christians, if you're honest, a whole lot of y'all and us feel that way. Then answer my prayers. What's on that? What's next?
He always answers prayer. It's just not always the answer we want.
Okay.
Yes.
But it's not audible.
Oh, shucks.
I'd like to be audible, and then I can handle better yes, no, or wait. If it's audible, people like that. I'm going to look insane. People around me seem to achieve, and I don't.
Now, I recall reading in David where he contemplates something like that, where he says, the unrighteous are getting everything that they want, and I'm doing the right thing, and I'm not. And of course, you got to be king. I don't understand that. But it's like, what point is it to do the right thing if they're getting everything they want and they're not doing the right thing?
That's not
Fair.
You know, I sacrifice more to achieve with little or no results. What do you got there? I sacrifice more to achieve. I sacrifice more to achieve more with little or no results. I would bet you that this is what a lot of Christians, but especially Christian leadership, feels like.
Mm-hmm.
Especially in the post-pandemic.
Yeah.
Right. They're doing things the same old way, expecting the previous results that weren't necessarily the right results, getting no results, and going, what's the point? It's all worth it? What? Why go to seminary? What's the point? I do what the Bible says. I pray like the Bible says, and nothing happens for me. There's going to be a whole lot of people in churches that pray all the time and can honestly say, I've never heard the voice of God. That's honest. What's the next one? Is there something else?
Mm-mm.
Oh, okay, good.
Next is the blank slot for the next question.
How do you feel about Yahweh communicating no way to your goals and your dreams? How do you feel about it?
I think you need to ask in prayer what your purpose is in life. Maybe your goals and dreams are not aligned with His vision for you.
And that's Bible, because he says, delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. When you delight yourself in the Lord, your desires of your heart change.
That's right.
And so we should believe that way?
Yes.
Yeah.
Easily said.
Easily said.
It's almost like you have to go through. You question, you're mad, you go through a harvest.
Yes.
And then at the end, you say, okay, Lord, not mine.
Yes.
But it's awesome. It's
not a lot of us that do Jeremiah, which is here my Lord, or Isaiah, here my Lord, send me. I'm a man of unclean lips, but send me anyway. Here's what happened. By the way, this is going to be part of our next study. Here's what happened. When you do what Terry just described, frequently you are going to be put in your uncomfort zone. Why do you think Moses went, I can't stop? The Lord gives him answers to everything. Here's what you need to do the job. Who am I going to say something? I can't talk. Right? He's going to put you in your discomfort zone if you are going to be like-minded to have a will that's like his. So it's really easy for Christians to say that, but it's like, look, don't ask me to do missionary work because I'm pretty comfortable being in Montpelier.
That goes back to that last point about praying and reading the Bible. Yeah, we're doing all those things, but we're doing them in our
Comfort zone.
comfort zone.
I remember brilliantly when Ed was with us, he said, and that's why I've not used it so much in our study. Goal is when you start making steps and strides toward it. So reading the Bible is one thing, acting it out is when you start doing it. Commentary from our guys hanging out.
Oops, sorry, I thought you wanted that one. Oh, hold on.
Can you hear me okay?
Oh yeah.
Yes.
I love it. Obviously, I'm on the tail end of it, but did I hear Diane?
Hold on. Yeah, I have to mute us, so you have to wait a second. Okay. Is it echoing on your side, Matt,
It
if I
is.
don't mute us?
It is not. I'm fine on my side.
Perfect. Okay.
All right. Did I hear Diane?
You did.
Hi, Diane. I love it. I haven't been on here long. Get into that in a minute, but where you're trekking is so powerful and so in line with where you're getting ready to go. I've heard two comments about the way the church has always done things, and that's not getting any better. It's only getting worse. I mean, two more reports came out this week, and then this question on the screen about Yahweh communicating no way to your goals. That's exactly where I'm going at the minute. Powerful, as always, Preston.
Go ahead and put the bullets up there if you
Okay.
can, Sarah.
You want all of them?
Sure.
Oops. Yeah.
So I think if we're honest about how you feel about Yahweh saying no way to your dreams and goals, here's kind of what you think. I honestly don't get why he's saying no. Oh no, I need a car to get around.
Yeah, but you know what? If we don't get it, and we say that, let me see if I get this straight. We're actually saying that we, in our finite mind, ought to be able to understand what the infinite has in mind, which we're trying to elevate ourselves.
So Steve already told you that there are churches saying that God's been withholding knowledge and in many ways growth from us. There are churches that are struggling that think that they should know. That's why people say, if God is such, why does he allow? Because they think that they know what God is and what his nature is. And this is the closest we're going to come to what his nature and who he is, short of meeting Jesus himself. And the book of Job is a discussion on you don't know what you think you should know.
So my point is, we can honestly say we don't get it, but at the same time, because he is the one that knows everything, we should be okay with not getting it because we're not where he is and have his mind.
Okay. And I'm not saying that's a wonderfully mature position to have. I would almost say that's a Sunday school position because people are okay hearing that in a sermon and then go home and then that's where they think.
I agree. I'm going to say this is real, this is true, this is how people are responding, but they shouldn't because they're not God, they're not going to think like God, and they're not going to get it.
But when I think about gods, and I think about Osiris, I think about Thor, I think about Hercules, I think about Poseidon, I understand their motivations. They're a lot like humans. They've got superpowers.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, we want to.
Why there's so much like
Matt's itching to add something here. You can't see him, but I can.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So that discussion that Preston and Gene just had, it's so powerful. Because in my opinion, and this is my opinion, both right. And here's the thing. Gene, what you're saying, I don't know, but I trust. I don't know, but I'm all in. No, but God's got this. Is the right answer. What Preston's saying is that the Sunday school answer is so true too. So what's the difference? And to me, it's okay. What do I do with that? Because trusting God doesn't mean I sit still. Trusting God doesn't mean I cross my fingers. Trusting God doesn't mean I just God's got this. God's like, well, yeah, I know. I created that. What are you doing about that? So it's a powerful thought. I'll get in that for a second.
So then, agreeing that Gene says, yes, I honestly don't get it as truth, then the next things hopefully you'll agree with. How do you feel about Yahweh communicating no way? The Bible says you have not because you ask not. I'm asking. The Bible says, ask anything in my name. I'm asking. The Bible says, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, okay, I got faith like a walnut. The Bible says, seek ye first the kingdom of heaven and all this righteousness, and all of this other stuff shall be added unto you. Where's the other stuff at? There's still another question. That's the next one. How do you feel about Yahweh when he communicates strongly and plainly no to you? What do you got there for bullets? I'm not too fond of Yahweh in these instances. If you're honest, I'm not too fond of Yahweh in those instances, right? Church people, you just got kicked out of church for asking your pastor that, right? Not too fun.
Revert back to our childhood. We don't like our parents saying no to us.
And the funny thing is, if you remember raising your kids, almost the first or second thing your kid could say after mom and dad was no, right? And that's because they were said no to so many times. So one thing that resonates negatively for us is no. And when Yahweh says it, not too fond of him. Heavenly Father, not too fond of Yahweh.
We like to talk about how God is love and how he wants us to love others. But there's more. There's more.
If I love you, don't touch the stove.
Exactly.
If I love you, no, you can't run into traffic. If I love you, no, you can't eat 10, 12 pieces of pizza. Daniel something. How do you feel about Yahweh when he communicates no to you? I have a lot of unanswered questions that I put. I've gotten to that point, and I've gotten to the point where it feels like the Lord still is okay with me when I go, why? Why? And I feel like through that process, I'm asking why fewer times. My arms are too short to box with God, but that doesn't mean I'm going to try a little Apollo Creed. I'm trying. And the Lord's big enough to handle that. You watch your hips. Boom, hip break happened. Then I got a name change with that that reminds me of my hip break happened because you can't wrestle with God. Look at you going Genesis on us. I'm not sure of my faith in these instances. That's probably the one we're most able to relate, and we will state. When Yahweh says no to my achievements, my dreams, my visions, my sense of achievement, I feel like, am I really saved? Am I really a believer? When I die, am I going to be in eternity in heaven with the Lord? How can he say no?
He's probably up there going, drama.
And he's eternal, so he can say it. He's got a sense of funny that's got to be different from ours because he's just going, oh, ye of short lives. You don't get how funny that is. Maybe I need to better understand what faith and my faith is. That rarely happens. That's the maturity point. That's the one that says what Terry says, which means maybe I'm riding the wrong horse thinking I know what God's mind is. Maybe I need to have different big boy pants on and understand what faith is and what my faith is supposed to look like. And that's a rediscovery that sometimes adults don't want to have to relive.
And every bit of that, if I may say this, is an indication that we're trying to strive. This is the Tower of Babel, is what it really comes down to. This is our trying to get our head around why he would say, no, we want answers. We want to understand this. And I'm not saying that's a terrible thing. I'm just saying that there is a level at which we have to say, I don't get it, but you're God, and I'm okay with that, and I can trust you with that. And there's where the issue comes in. Have I hitched my horses to the wrong wagon? Am I going the wrong direction? And have I done something out of step? Now that I can get that. Where did I stray? That may be an answer. A question I would ask. Where did I go wrong? That I would like to understand, but if it may not even have anything to do with what I've done. That's the problem I have.
Okay.
If it's a result of something I've done, I'm okay with that. But if everything else seems to be just right, and he says no, I'm going, yeah, I'd like to understand that, but I still have to go back to my faith and say, he's still God. I should be okay with that. But like you said, what you're dealing with is reality. We're not always good.
Correct. Because we need proof of things.
Mm-hmm.
And when it feels like we've just fallen on our keisters, that doesn't feel like God is honoring us or we're honoring him or that I'm in touch with the creator of the universe. It feels like I am a failure. And right now I'm wallowing in my own junk.
Like to put out a police.
Yeah.
Just have some little something from you, Lord, that tells me you love me.
You know, I haven't used and referenced that in a long time. I think Bruce may have preached a sermon on that years ago. The older I get, the funnier I continue to find that. And folks, if you don't know this, you got to read the book of Judges, Google Gideon, and then you'll see after mighty man of valor. See what happens afterwards. You'll get introduced to the fleeces after the meal, and the whole fleece thing is that's what not only it's partly what we miss about you being a person. To be able to see you and then respond to this because I live in Fleeceville. I love Fleeceville. I'm getting older right now where I'm kind of going, okay, that faith stuff kind of works. But for the most part, look, Gideon doesn't just put out a fleece once. Gideon asks for stuff that's just so supernaturally bizarre, and the Lord does it, and you're going, that's how I want the Lord to respond. So if I stand on one foot and I start quacking because I can't speak anymore, that's you speaking to me. Can you do that, Lord? Okay, now if I stand on no feet, and then that's when and Gideon asked the Lord for that, and the Lord does it. That's where we live. So let me back up. Any commentary there, folks?
Yes.
Go ahead. Mhm.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Man, that's so powerful. And here's what I'm thinking about because, G, what you said is so powerful when you just said about, if something's not going right, God, what did I do? Did I step left? Did I step right? Am I using the wrong version of the Bible? Maybe we should be doing this type of music. Wow, God, maybe I should be up at 6 a.m. instead of 6:30 a.m. to have my devotion because that 30 minutes probably makes a difference in whether or not I have the favor of God in my life or not. Man, you know what? I probably should sit. I mean, where does it end, right? And that's where I live. Let me talk about me because, Gene, that's a great thought in regards to where did I misstep. So all I can think about is this. When it comes to my salvation and the playing out of my salvation, I have to remember, this is for me, maybe for nobody else. I have to remember, I had, and I'm going to use a Matt Pettit term, I had diddly jack squat to do my salvation. Nothing. I didn't bring anything to the table but my wretchedness. And God's like, I can work with that. And so, but somehow though, when I become a believer, it's almost like, okay, now what am I going to contribute to this whole thing? And let me do a side note. I do need to contribute. There are commands, there are laws. I have to be obedient. There's the Great Commission. I need to pray, read, grow. But there's a point at which I get all that under my belt, and I'm like, you know what? I wonder if I'm contributing enough. I'm wondering if I'm doing the exact right thing. And God's like, you can't contribute, Jack. This is Greek. Jack diddly squat to anything. And I want you to grow, and there are consequences for actions. I get that. But my point is this. If I would live out my faith, I would realize it's all about faith. And there's nothing I can contribute to the plan of God that's going to make it any better. All I can do is stay in the moment with Jesus and let him work through me in that moment. But sometimes it's not about what he can do through me. It's about what I can do for him. And that's where we stray, and that's what I'm trying to figure out. And I don't have the answer, but that's I'll get there in the second hour.
Okay, so I think that's a great point, Matt, but I also want to remind us of where some of these points stay on the other side of the volleyball or on the other side of the tennis court. The Lord can do the fleece supernatural stuff, but where I've lingered over the past, if not 2 days, the past 3 days is this. 1 to 2 million people passed over the Red Sea on dry land. It wasn't marshy, it wasn't muddy, it wasn't swampy. The Lord supernaturally not only parted the waters, but then made the ground dry for them to walk over. And 3 days later, after the fleece was put out, after God answered the question in the most powerful way possible, they were belly aching about, we should have stayed where we was. The food was better. People treated us a little unkind, but for the most part, So it's nice and polite that we're having a discussion saying, well, when Yahweh communicates no to us, I simply refer to the Bible and I say, that's okay, Lord. No, we don't. Because when the Lord communicates clearly and we understand it, 3 days later we're belly aching going, why me? Why me? So we're going to wrap it up for today. But we're going to start with the last question that's on our sheet, and then we're going to go into Deuteronomy 34, 1 through 12. And because I'm feeling kind of in a giving spirit, because Diane's here, and I've gotten accused of being a bore/board, I'm going to give you some homework to start for our next study. Because surprisingly, especially with where your conversation is today, it has begun connecting the dots. And it's become a reality for me over the past 2 weeks. Why the Lord has me operate with our Sunday school lessons the way that they happen. I understand now why it goes that way, and I'll share more with you as we go through to help you understand why we do our Sunday schools the way that we do. But a couple things. Number one, if you're not plugging in to the talent / the gifting that is Brother Steve Jenkins, you guys need to pay attention that the interjections of the stuff that Steve finds for us that help you to have apologetics in your own words in language you can understand is a gift. Because I don't know who to find. I don't know who the names are. Steve researches, finds these guys, views them, vets them before he says, this is okay for you to be able to use. And he's found some giants. And I mean, they're not huge names, but in terms of the power of their content, he's found some giants over the past several weeks, if not certainly in the time he's been doing this. So he's also a resource if you need to reach out and say, hey, who is this guy? Hey, where is this? Steve can put you in touch with that. And as crazy as it sounds, that's kind of a calling and a ministry position itself, at least the way I honor it. And then it's really helpful to me during the course of the week, because sometimes I'll reach out to Steve or Sarah and say, what is that? And then I'll take the time and watch these guys and go, there are still people out here that are modern day truth tellers in a way that people can understand. So it's exciting. Our next study that we're going to go to, and we're going to spend some time in Deuteronomy 34, 1 through 12, next week and maybe the week following, we'll see, is subtitled, I Can't Go For That. Okay, it's going to be subtitled, I Can't Go For That. And where we're going to linger is going to be Romans 1 through 17. 1 through 17 is where we're going to do. Now, we like to spend a lot of time in 18 and beyond, but we're going to spend a lot of time in Romans 1 through 17.